Hey, everybody. Good evening. This is your host, Lori Spencer. Welcome, 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 everybody, to this birthday vigil for Julian Assange. My co-host, my usual co-host, Rick Walker of Maverick News, is still on the air right now doing Maverick News until 9 p.m. Eastern. So he will be joining us later in the 9 o'clock hour. And in the meantime, we've got an amazing lineup of guest speakers. We've got journalists. We've got friends of Assange, longtime supporters of Julian Assange here with us tonight. And I felt it was appropriate, I guess, for an American to host this Twitter space because it's my country that is trying to prosecute Julian Assange for doing journalism. It's my country that is trying to extradite him here and lock him up for the rest of his life, maybe 2 or 3 lifetimes. 175 years is the maximum penalty that he could face if convicted of all 18 charges under the Espionage Act. So tonight, we just wanted to gather his friends together, his supporters together here on Twitter Spaces, and have an unedited, uncensored conversation where we aren't bound by a tight broadcast clock. We don't have to do sound bites. We don't have to be brief. We can just let it all out. Everything that we've had pent up inside of us for a long time. This is a chance for us to speak out at length and to really say what's on our minds because Twitter doesn't censor us. Thank goodness. This is one of the last platforms that we still have. And Twitter Spaces is truly a gift. It's a way for us to connect with people all over the world. Nobody is charged for making a long distance phone call overseas. We can all speak to each other in real time, no matter where you are. And so the idea for this is we're starting it here in the United States tonight. And as the rest of the world starts to wake up, who knows, this Twitter space may go on for an hour, 2 hours, could go several hours, could go all night, could go for several days, as long as we feel like keeping it going, as long as there are people who wish to speak. And when you have the microphone, you can speak for as long as you want, which is also, I think, a real blessing. And as much as I have some questions for Elon Musk, I also want to thank him for providing us this platform here at Twitter Spaces. And to start off, I usually just do some opening remarks. I wanted to bring everyone's attention to where this case stands as of right now and why this is so urgent and why we're doing this tonight. We are here because his extradition is imminent. And when I say imminent, I mean it could happen within the next few days or a couple of weeks. He has pretty much exhausted every single appeal. And in fact, the High Court in Great Britain didn't even want to hear this appeal. So there's a piece in The Guardian that came out this week, written by Duncan Campbell. It's an opinion piece, but, you know, it's rare that The Guardian stands with Julian Assange, it seems, anymore. So thanks to Duncan Campbell for writing this wonderful op-ed piece. It says, time is running out for Julian Assange. If MPs do not act, how can they say they value free speech? And he writes, a life-size bronze statue of him appeared in Parliament Square over the weekend, but the real Julian Assange could very shortly be taken, handcuffed and protesting, from Belmarsh Prison in London and flown off to a high-security jail in the United States. The statue stood alongside 2 others of Chelsea Manning and Edward Snowden at a rally to remind us that Assange's extradition could now be very imminent. Chelsea Manning, of course, was the former U.S. soldier who leaked damning information that Assange published through WikiLeaks. Edward Snowden still waits in Russia to see whether all the talk of the sanctity of free speech in his country amounts to more than words. He writes, the very last message I received from Daniel Ellsberg before he died earlier this month was about Julian Assange. Having risked his own freedom so bravely back in 1971 with his revelations about the Vietnam War, Ellsberg was one of Assange's most vocal supporters, not least because he identified what he had done to expose what had been happening in the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. He argued that if the case against Assange goes ahead, quote, Any journalist anywhere in the world could now be extradited to the United States for exposing information classified in the United States. Along with Alice Walker and Noam Chomsky, Daniel Ellsberg had called on the U.S. President, Joe Biden, to halt the extradition, saying, quote, Biden's Justice Department, which has proclaimed a renewed commitment to press freedom, could end these proceedings at any moment. After all, it was Biden, when still a Democrat senator, who campaigned against the extradition of IRA suspects to the UK to face trial. He did so on the grounds that to allow it would mean, quote, admitting that the justice system in Northern Ireland is fair, a notion I absolutely abhor. That's what Joe Biden said, unquote. Biden could indeed act, but then so could our own politicians. Stella Assange, Julian's wife, and the mother of his 2 young children, said at the Parliament Square rally last weekend, quote, we're really at the end game now. We have to free him. His life depends on it. The Labour MPs, John McDonnell, the former Shadow Chancellor, and others spoke at this gathering last weekend, but only a few other MPs have campaigned on his behalf. Richard Bergen, MP for Leeds East, says that Assange is, quote, being persecuted for exposing U.S. war crimes, a blatant attack on journalism. Where are all those MPs who voted last month for the passing of the conservative government's Higher Education, also called the Freedom of Speech Act, aimed at fighting what is portrayed as cancel culture in universities? What is extradition, if not an extreme form of cancellation? Those conservative MPs who may feel that this is just something for lefties and liberals to worry about should read the recent article by Peter Hitchens in the Daily Mail on Sunday, in which he reprised his powerful 2020 attack on what he described as a lawless kidnapping and a basic violation of our national sovereignty. He added, it is unimaginable that the United States would hand over to us any of its citizens who had been accused of leaking British secret documents. Yet, if Mr. Assange is sent to face trial in the U.S., any British journalist who comes into possession of classified material from the United States, though he has committed no crime according to our own law, faces the same danger. For all those MPs anxious that Britain should always, quote, take back control, here's a perfect way to do so. Julian Assange has now served 4 years in Belmarsh without trial, not to mention the years he spent in the Ecuadorian embassy, where his private moments with his wife and his family were shamefully filmed and spied upon by U.S. security agencies. It is still unclear what sort of conditions he would be held in if he's extradited, but the publication in The Guardian last month of Abu Zabadiah's illustrations of the torture and the degradation that he and others were subjected to in Guantanamo Bay should be a chilling reminder of what can still happen to political prisoners under the jurisdiction of the United States. Parliament Square is a site that celebrates in statue form such heroic figures as Mahatma Gandhi and Nelson Mandela. The statue closest to those of the trio erected last weekend was that of the suffragist Millicent Fawcett, with the famous quotation beneath it, quote, courage calls to courage everywhere. As the final act in this saga approaches, the judiciary could still show the courage that has so far failed them. If they do not, then the Home Secretary, Braverman, can still step in and demonstrate the same independence Theresa May showed in halting the extradition of the hacker Gary McKinnon back in 2012. But if our judges and politicians fail to end this charade, then please can we be spared the hypocrisy of concerns about cancel culture and any grandstanding about the importance of free speech? Again, that is Duncan Campbell in The Guardian. Excellent, excellent piece. So just a few words from me before I open up the floor to speakers, how I feel about this. You know, I've been supporting and following Julian and WikiLeaks since he started the website back in 2006. He initially started WikiLeaks as a protest against the Iraq War. That was the original idea. Over time, of course, more and more whistleblowers came forward that leaked documents to WikiLeaks of revealing all sorts of crimes, not just government crimes, not just war crimes, corporate crimes. WikiLeaks has brought us so much information that we would not have known, most likely, otherwise, mainly because the mainstream media isn't interested. I support Julian as a journalist. I've been in this business for 35 years, and I know what it's like to try and publish information that the government doesn't want published or corporate sponsors don't want published. I myself have been down this road, and until there was WikiLeaks, whistleblowers really didn't have too many places to go where they could count on an honest journalist to publish their revelations or their documents. Remember when Chelsea Manning initially tried to leak her documents, she called the Washington Post. She called the New York Times. They never returned her calls. They weren't interested. So without WikiLeaks, we probably would not know what we know now. We probably never would have seen the collateral murder video. Courage is contagious, and it takes one person, just one person, and that person was Julian Assange, to stand up first, to be the first publisher to make those documents available. And then The Guardian, then the New York Times, and then these other publications found their courage too and published those documents too. So that leads us to what they called the New York Times problem, and why the Obama administration did not pursue prosecution of WikiLeaks and Julian Assange, because they would then have to also prosecute the New York Times and other publications who published WikiLeaks documents and classified documents. So on that note, I'm going to open up the floor to our first speaker, and I'd like to bring in my friend, Misty Winston, also known as Comrade Misty, is Putin's puppet, as she goes by on Twitter. And Misty is a radio host at TNT Radio, a global radio network that truly endorses free speech. She's also one of Julian Assange's most vocal supporters, and we need her and we love her in this fight. I understand she's having some technical issues trying to join.
I'm here.
Space.
I'm here. Yeah,
Misty,
I'm here. I figured it out.
Great. Welcome.
Yes.
I'm so glad. Welcome.
Thank you.
The floor is yours, my friend.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And also thank you for hosting the space. Thank you to Lori and to Maverick News for hosting the space on what is unfortunately Julian Assange's fifth birthday in Belmarsh. I have been involved in this fight for many years now, unfortunately. I hate that I have to say that. I hate that it's gone on this long. I've been involved in this fight for many years, and it's very... it's kind of it's a good mix to have Julian Assange's birthday on July 3rd, and then tomorrow we're all supposed to be celebrating Independence Day, right? We're supposed to be celebrating all of our freedoms. Meanwhile, we are literally destroying the First Amendment in broad daylight, and it doesn't seem like many people care. Although I will say, over the past many years, we have seen support for Julian grow immensely, which has been really nice to see. I hate to say it, but it's not happening fast enough for me, and I'm sure for Julian and his family as well. He is not doing well. I spoke to his brother on my show a couple of weeks ago, and he's hanging in there. I think he's maybe one of the strongest people I have ever been aware of. I'm not sure that I could handle the things that he has been through over the course of the past decade plus. We know from Professor Nils Melzer that he's been subjected to psychological torture for over a decade, and he is struggling. I think anybody would be. And I think a lot of people forget that he's human. I think some of his supporters, rightfully so, kind of look at him as somebody who's very strong and somebody who's been able to deal with a lot, but he is just a man. And I think that everybody has their breaking point. And we know that he has suffered a mini stroke. His health has been declining for many years now. He has a lot of underlying health conditions, and he is living in some of the most dire circumstances imaginable. I mean, Belmarsh Prison is not called the Guantanamo of the UK for no reason. And we need to remember too that he's being held there simply for publishing the truth, for doing his job, for doing journalism. They can try to dress it up however they want to, but that's the reality. WikiLeaks has a 100% record of accuracy. They've never had to retract a single word that they've ever published. I would love if there's another news organization out there with that kind of record, I would like somebody to show it to me, because I'm pretty sure it doesn't exist. This is a guy who did everything he was supposed to do as a journalist, and exposed some of the biggest stories and some of the most heinous crimes that we have ever had evidence for. I think that, there's a lot of people would say that he has broken more stories than most other journalists combined, if not all. And I don't think that he gets near enough credit. And I don't mean to give just Julian credit. Obviously, he didn't do it alone. He benefited greatly from the courage of whistleblowers who were willing to leak documents to him. He also did it with a very small but spunky staff who was willing to do that kind of work and take those kinds of risks. But he is the one who is being penalized for it. He is he's been made the face of WikiLeaks and therefore the target of U.S. empire. So that's why I speak specifically to him. I don't mean to diminish the work of others or the courage or bravery of the whistleblowers that he's worked with. But yeah, I mean, this is to me, and I get a lot of flack often because people say I am overly dramatic or overly passionate about this case. I don't think I'm passionate enough. I don't think other people are passionate enough. To me, this is the front line. This case is the front line for every other fight that we face, because if we cannot speak, if we cannot educate ourselves and others, if we can't hold discussions, conversations, debate, if we don't have access to information, if we don't have the ability to hold power to account, we can't fight for anything else that we care about. And so, in my opinion, this is the fight of our lifetime. I think that it greatly impacts everything else, anything else that we care about. And it is something that I think that they have done a very good job of maintaining narrative control over. They have spent the past decade plus smearing Assange in every which way imaginable. And they've done a great job of creating this comic book villain type character out of him. And they've done that for a reason. It's much easier to torture somebody to death in broad daylight if nobody cares. And so a lot of people have become very passive, or they just don't really, they don't care, or they don't know. I think genuinely it's the latter. I think a lot of people just don't know what's happening to Julian, and frankly, they don't know how it impacts them. The thing that I have come up against as an activist is that I think for most people, press freedom and free speech is a very abstract concept. It's not something that is in your face, like, oh, hey, I can't feed my family, or I can't afford to take my kid to the doctor today. And so a lot of people are just completely unaware of how dire the situation is and how it impacts them in any way. So just to me, I think that this is something that we have to be willing, we're going to have to start thinking outside the box. We have to be willing to get louder, to be bolder, to be braver, and to really get in the face of empire. Listen, we're not going to get, we absolutely know we are not going to get justice through the court system. That has been made abundantly clear. If you've been following the court case, you will know that the conflicts of interest, the corruption, all of the stuff that is rampant throughout this entire case, there is absolutely no way we will get justice through the court system in the UK or in the US. I mean, we know we won't get it in the US, but we're also not going to get it in the UK. And so the only thing, I've been saying this for years, the only thing that stops this is mass public pressure. We have to make it politically untenable for them to continue this case. And I think that yes, right. I think that is right. It's not going to be easy. It's going to take a lot of work, but we have to get louder. We have to get bolder. This guy doesn't deserve this, and it's not just about him. I think it is so much bigger than that, but his life is absolutely worth fighting for. I can't look in the faces of his two young sons and not fight for him and his family. And I think a lot of people who are probably in this space feel the same way. So yeah, I don't want to go on for too long. I have a tendency to ramble, so I will cut it short. But also, just thank you to everybody.
Oh, ramble on. We love to hear you ramble.
Don't encourage me, Lori.
I'm encouraging you.
I don't want to take up too much time. I know you have a lot of speakers here, a lot of really fantastic speakers. So I want to make sure to turn the microphone over to them as well. But I do just want to say thank you to everybody that is here, to everybody who's willing to take a stand on this issue, and to engage in this fight, regardless of political ideology. I say it all the time. I don't care who you are. I don't care who you voted for. I don't care what ism you subscribe to or what books you read, what party you belong to. I don't care. If you are willing to enter into this fight and fight to secure the future of press freedom and fight to save Julian's life, then welcome aboard. I'm happy to stand beside you anytime. And I think that that's the kind of energy we need to take forward. So again, thank you to Lori for hosting the space. I really appreciate that. And thank you to everybody who is here today and being willing to enter into this. I appreciate it.
And thank you, Misty, for taking part and lending your very strong voice to this protest. That's the whole reason that we do this. That's why we're doing this Twitter space tonight. For the Americans, we're starting this in America because this is America's problem. We started this. We started this persecution of Julian Assange. We're the country that's trying to extradite him. We're the country trying to lock him up for the rest of his life. And we're the country with the secrets that he exposed to the world. So we are responsible for this. And you're right. Too many Americans are passive about this. Too many Americans don't understand the case because it's a very, very complex case. Extradition law is extremely complicated. Then you get into international law. And most Americans just don't get it. They don't understand it. It's hard to keep up with. And that's why I invited so many people to this space tonight who are expert level on the case, who've been following it for years, journalists who've been covering it for years. Unfortunately, Kevin Gosztola could not join us tonight. He was committed to be on the space, and I really wanted to have him because he's covered every segment of this trial as it moved along, and he's done such good coverage, but he had some family stuff come up tonight. He may join us later. He says when he gets home, he'll tune in, and if we're still going, he'll join in. Also, Julian's brother, Gabriel Shipton, is also, because of the time difference, it's difficult for him to join, but he also may join the space later when he's available. But tonight we have an amazing lineup of people here who want to speak in Julian's defense. And just to go down the list of people that we do have here or who will be joining us later, we have my friend Scott Ritter, who's, of course, a great advocate for Julian, and he's here with us tonight. Everybody give Scott Ritter a hand. Yay! And we have Kynan and Jose, the hosts of Declaring Independence, which is a great podcast. I was just a guest on with them this week. And of course, you guys know them. They go around and disrupt all these political town halls, call out the politicians on their hypocrisy, and always make a point to ask them, what about Julian Assange? We have independent candidate for U.S. Senate, New York, Diane Sare is with us. We also have the national chair of the Libertarian Party, Angela McArdle, is in the house tonight. We have my friend Jay Scott, who's the host of the Jay Scott Ascension podcast. We have Caleb Maupin, another good friend, strong reporter for RT Television, also founder for the Center for Political Innovation, and a very good friend of Assange. And we have Craig Craig Jardula of the Convo Couch is here to speak tonight. And others that will be joining us overseas, like my friend Republic Welsh and Michael Krupa. And as Europe starts to wake up over across the pond, we'll be bringing in some guests from overseas as well. So who wants to go next? Who would like to speak next? Raise your hand if you'd like to be the next speaker, or I'll just pick somebody. Looks like Angela's ready to go. Let's go to Angela McArdle, chair of the National Libertarian Party. Hi, Angela. Welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm delighted to be on this. I'm out in the middle of nowhere visiting family right now, so I hope I have decent service and you can hear me okay.
You sound great. Perfect.
Great. So, I really love a lot of the things that Misty said. I really appreciate her passion. I know everyone here is passionate about this cause. And I kind of spend my days, just racking my brain thinking, like, what can we do? And it's really frustrating. I felt really encouraged to see pretty good turnout at Gabriel Shipton's documentary screenings. I felt really fortunate that I could help push attendance at those. But I still felt, at the end of the day, like it's not enough. It's not enough. How do we get Julian to be a household name? How do we get this story properly marketed and disseminated to the masses and really drilled into their heads? And so I'm kind of still mulling over, how do we make him like a pop culture icon? And And, I'm really curious to hear what people think about this, because it's sort of a double-edged sword, right? Like, to make his story just like really popular and burn into people's minds, I sometimes worry that it's going to get watered down and that people aren't going to get the gravity and seriousness of it. And I don't ever want to remove that sort of visceral element, because I think it's so critical for people to understand the gravity of the situation. So I'm kind of mulling that over, right now. But another thing that I would love the LP to partner with other people on, is to get some little free Julian Assange like badges on people's campaign websites, whatever party you're in, right? I feel like we should be getting a little like universally recognized, you pardon us. So that's something I'm going to be pushing. But I'm just kind of curious what other people think about a couple of those ideas. I know we're all passionate and we want to do what we can, and I think it's good for us to collaborate and constantly workshop and refine it and push it out there, because we're also going to need, to make real headwaves on this. I think investors. So yeah, that's some of the stuff I've been mulling over. I want to come with a passionate, fiery plea for everyone to support Julian Assange. I feel like Misty and people who are closer to him, they're the best ones to deliver that. I certainly feel that way, but right now I'm really occupying like in the headspace of trying to do something to reach normies. Because if we can reach normies, right, then anything's possible.
That's right. And I want to thank you. I'm a longtime libertarian. I want to thank you and the Libertarian Party. You have been staunch advocates for WikiLeaks, for Julian Assange, long before he was arrested. The Libertarian Party has always consistently stood by WikiLeaks for freedom of information, for freedom of the press, for the First Amendment, for the Constitution. And you're taking a principled stand on this. I wish more political parties would do the same. Like you said, the goal is to reach the normies, the people who vote Republican and Democrat, the people who voted for Joe Biden. Those are the ones that we have to get, calling their representatives, calling their senators, calling the White House, getting out in the streets. And I love your idea of trying to make him more of a pop culture icon, more memes, more posters, more documentary films, more hashtags. This is a social media world. And here we are using social media to try and get this message out. That's why we're doing this Twitter space. And I see that the space is growing as long as we are talking. So let's keep talking. Keep going, Angela.
So my next big idea, and I have not worked on this nearly enough, but is to try to get a minor league sports team to get free Assange on their jerseys or their shoes.
Oh, that's cool.
Right. NBA did it for a lot of their like special interest. There was a lot of BLM stuff all over people's jerseys. So I'm like, can we hit up a minor league team and start a trend there and just kind of work our way upwards? So that's something I'm probably going to be working on over the next year. Anybody who's actually better connected to sports, that would be cool, because I could use some help.
That's awesome. That is awesome. And I see Craig's got his hand up. Craig, you want to join in? Craig Pasta? Yo, Pasta.
How you doing,
Unmute
guys?
yourself. You're in.
I'm in. Am I here? In. All right. Welcome. Hello, Angela. Great that you're in there. We all want to know who the Libertarian candidate's going to be any day now. If you can kind of leak that on this Twitter space, I'm sure Lori would really appreciate it. But if you don't know yet, we'll calmly wait in the wings. Well,
I continue to push the wheel of pain like Conan the Barbarian.
Well, I've been saying on a lot of shows, I'm like, I know that, they have a great share now, and I know Angela knows that they're losing a little ground, but I'm sure they'll get their together and get out there soon. I think with Cornel West announcing in the Green Party, right now, we don't want to lose the thunder that's here, and Kennedy is raising money at a great, pace of $1 million in 24 hours. So I think things are heated up, and we have two good candidates right there that can really bring a strong message. But we're waiting for that third one, Angela, so... we'll get going over there, We're waiting for you. But anyways, about Julian, what can I say that hasn't already been said? And the reason why I jumped in, I was going to kind of wait for a lot of the other speakers to speak and then kind of follow on up at the end. But Angela's hitting a great point right now, and I think that's what it is. And I think we need to also simplify our message for the normies. Because I want to thank all you here that, who spoke so much about Julian. Misty is, been such a great leader and getting to understand the whole story from beginning to end about Julian Assange. And it wasn't just about Julian Assange. Obviously it's about his message and what he brings to the table, but creating a system at one point where the whistleblower didn't even know who was whistleblowing the information from, that whole kind of secrecy and eliminating some type of way in which the CIA or any of the deep state entities can hold multiple people accountable. I thought that was really, really great. But, just in fact, what he's been able to do. And, when I say simplifying our message is making sure we tell the normies out there, we had a farce of July party 2 years ago, 2 July 3rds ago at Echo Park. And I made these unbelievable vegan cheeseburgers. I can do regular burgers now, but back then I made these beautiful vegan cheeseburgers with a tomato jam and some garlic aioli and a fried onion and this beautiful white cheese. And we were offering to anybody walking into the park. So we were able to get a lot of normies to come on over and talk about what's going on. And basically the way I would paint things is that Julian Assange is the vessel for truth. In other words, they want to eliminate him because the deep state, our government, doesn't want people to know what they are doing, period, bottom line. And he's been able to do that better than almost anybody. And can you imagine a world when we can't see the truth? We're not. It's not transparent about what our government's what's going on. And I know a lot of people kind of accept that. They're doing whatever they're doing. They're always going to do that. They've been doing it for quite some time. You got to say no and reject that. That we need to understand and we need to know when they're spilling blood in our names. Collateral murder should be played in almost every, I'd say, middle school 8th grade class out there. That's where I would start playing. They should all see what the empire is doing in our name with our tax dollars, the blood they are spilling. And we must point out guys like Julian Assange are the ones who've made that possible. So it's just not him. Like, who's next? Who do they silence next? I know there's going to be a Daniel Ellsberg event in D.C. About whistleblowers and whatnot, and I plan to go there. And anybody who gets the chance to go there should go to that because we have to continue spreading this message. But thinking along the lines of what Angela's been talking about, like how do we get the normies involved, right? How do we get them to see what's going on? Because I think people are just very aloof and just blindsided by what Julian Assange is meant to be doing, So we tried little things like the farce of July. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to reach out to the Mumia people. I know a lot of Mumia people. Mumia let me say his name right. I got to learn. Mumia Abu Jamal. A lot of those people who, they claim that he's a political prisoner. I'm going to learn their story, and I'm going to see if we can find a way to connect these two groups together, because we have to throw anything out there now. We have to try every single move. So if it's building coalition between different groups, so be it. So that's going to be my vessel and what I'm going to try to do to spread the message of Julian Assange. And I think we should start looking at other angles like that. How do we build coalition between different groups? That's what's important to me, and that's what we're going to continue to do.
When you asked about who's next, who are they coming for next? Look at the case of Gonzalo Lira now. What are they going to do with him? Are they going to try and, he broke the law of Ukraine, not the United States. So it's a slightly different kind of case, but the idea is the same. They're locking up a guy for doing journalism, and he's an American citizen who should be protected by the First Amendment, but he's in a foreign country. Right? Where they have laws against that sort of thing, where they have laws against a free press in Ukraine. So, Gonzalo is one of many. We also see the attempted prosecution of Alina Lipp, the German journalist, for reporting another side of the news, being prosecuted by the German government. We saw the German government open an investigation into Roger Waters, who's another one of Julian's greatest supporters, when he was in Berlin a couple of weeks ago doing a concert. So this is the world that we live in now. And the Assange case, and I've been saying this for years, sets a very dangerous precedent for journalists, for activists, for anyone who is outspoken against the empire. That's how the empire strikes back. They can prosecute you just for your speech, for doing journalism, and that is un-American. Here we are on the verge of the 4th of July here in the United States. And that's what outrages me as an American, as a journalist, as an activist, as an advocate, strong advocate, free speech, absolutist, as a libertarian. And that's why I am supporting Robert F. Kennedy Jr. for president. One of many reasons is he's the candidate who I believe has a chance of getting to the White House. I really do. And if he makes it there, he's made it very clear that he's going to pardon Julian Assange on day one. First thing, as soon as he gets to the White House. And release all those JFK files we've been waiting for, which, Julian himself put out a call back in 2017 when the JFK Records Act expired. It was in place for 25 years. And at the end of the 25 years, in October of 2017, President Trump was supposed to declassify and release all of the remaining files that are still being kept secret by our government. And Trump promised to do it. And then he got a visit the next day from the FBI and the CIA, and they brought pressure to bear. Sure enough, President Trump caved. He backed down, and he said, well, I'll release some of the JFK files, but not all of the JFK files. And he had another opportunity to do that, and once again, caved to pressure from the intelligence community. And at that time, of course, Julian was still allowed to tweet back then. He was still at the Ecuadorian embassy. And he put out a tweet through WikiLeaks saying, we will pay $1 million to anyone who can get us those JFK files. And interestingly enough, no whistleblower ever came forward and took him up on that $1 million offer. I don't know if that offer still stands, if WikiLeaks is still offering the $1 million, but if anybody's out there with access to these secret JFK files, I think that offer from WikiLeaks is still on the table. So I see that Jose Vega has his hand
Lori,
up.
Can I say one last thing really quick too, just as well?
Oh, sure. Yeah, go ahead, Craig.
And I'm going to give Jose the mic over there, but I just also want to say that is something too. You mentioned RFK. This is something that even Cornel West is pointing out really quickly out there and he says it. He never mentions one without the other, without mentioning Mumia, without mentioning Edward Snowden, without mentioning Leonard Peltier. I think there's an avenue right there to connect these groups. So if anybody's out there knows anybody in these other particular groups, reach out to them. Let's bring it together. Let's make a mass movement to get this guy's name out there so the normies can pick up on it, and maybe one day this guy can walk out while he's still here on the face of the earth. Thank you, Lori.
Outstanding. Thank you, Pasta. Thank you. And please stick around. Once I just kind of want everyone to feel free to jump in whenever you've got something to say. Of course, we'll all be polite and try not to talk over one another. And I do ask that when you're not speaking to please mute your mic just to cut down on any background noise so that this will sound good on playback later. And I'm going to turn the mic over to Jose Vega. How you doing, Jose?
Oh, I'm doing quite well. Thank you for hosting this space. I'm really happy to see everybody on this space. You have a great, wonderful lineup of speakers. I definitely want to give a special shout out to Misty because she's really been holding down the fort with the Assange cause. We get distracted oftentimes with electoral politics, and I've had a revelation lately that electoral politics makes you kind of dumb, and I think Misty might be onto something when it comes to that. So I really want to thank her for not getting lost in the sauce and really staying true to the mission. I think we need people like that, and so thank you for that, Misty. With Assange being in prison, it really does rely on us who are on the outside to push his mission, his mission and also his message forward, because we have a really big responsibility, which is that we are all free from the shackles of Belmarsh prison and soon to be in the United States prison system, which will be horrible. And so that means, what is it then that we have to do? That we are still on the outside of the cells, right? And I think one thing that I always emphasize people to do is to do the interventions that myself and Kynan and Anastasia, who I see has her hand up, and Diane, who I see is also in here, and others have done, is always mention Assange. When I confronted the heads of the New York Times and Washington Post and others, that was a big revolution, because I said to them, while you guys get fat checks, Julian Assange is sitting in prison for doing your jobs. And so I guess as we proceed with the discussion, I would just want people to ask themselves that question. We're free. What does that mean we have to do, since we're not behind the bars right now that Julian Assange is in? And then I would just say, Angela, maybe you should run Assange for president. they're trying him like an American citizen, even though he's not. So, filing FEC paperwork, you could cite the indictment and say, well, they're trying him like one. And there's no laws against running for president in prison. I'm sure they'll shoot it down, but it'd be a nice little fun experiment to see if it could be done. So I'll end it there. I'm excited to hear what everyone else has to say, and thank you for inviting me.
Thank you for coming. I'd like to bring in your friends. I'd like to bring in Kynan and Anastasia. Let's start with Anastasia Battle. Looks like you're unmuted. Please go right ahead. Hi.
Can you hear me okay?
Hear you loud and clear.
Great.
Welcome.
Yeah, I think one thing that's really important to identify with what happened to Julian Assange is that this is something on the caliber of like a 9/11 or like the effect of a 9/11 or the effect of a Kennedy assassination. Because what you see now in the mainstream media is that people are so scared to think that they have to go to the State Department and just say, well, just tell me what I need to say. And that's what you get. You have no actual media going on out there in the world. And I think it's very important that we recognize that a lot of the intimidation that we're getting is coming. I completely agree with Craig Pasta, that it's intimidation to get people to not say the truth, to not speak out. And there's a lot of operations going on, which I'm sure other people see or are aware of, to get us to fight amongst each other, to gossip, to complain, to get depressed, to get demoralized. And that is not something that I intend to allow to happen. And what we're doing right now, which Jose, Kynan, Diane, actually Angela and McArdle, a number of us have formed a international peace coalition to unite not only the coalitions in the United States, but around the world. And we're pulling together independent journalists so we can actually share information and intelligence amongst each other. We can start creating a dominance, a voice of what's really truthful and getting this out to people. And you start getting this kind of discussion going, then you are going to reach the quote unquote normies. You are going to reach the regular people because it's going to be unavoidable. You're going to have everybody talking about this kind of stuff. And you pair that with the political activism that we've been doing in approaching political people in political office or other really terrible media outlets like the New York Times or what have you, and just start confronting them on this and make sure that it's recorded and get it out. Because we have an opportunity right now, given just how close we are to thermonuclear war, that people are perking up. People are listening to what's going on. And I think you take what happened with Julian Assange, you take what's happening with the media in general and what he attempted to do in order to expose what was really going on in Iraq and what was happening in the Middle East in general. I think you can start waking people up with this. What I'm getting when I talk to people is that it's not that they don't think, it's not that they can't understand what's going on. It's that they think they have no power. And what we have to demonstrate is that power is not, how many people can you get together or how much money do you have, but it's your ability to inspire someone else to think and to act for the good. So I wanted to add this in there because I think this is very important if we're really serious in trying to take this on as a discussion, not only to free Julian Assange, but to free what he attempted to do. That's where we're heading right now. That's what we have to do.
That's why I love the interventions that you guys do at these political town halls. I think it's so effective and so powerful. I think it's the only way, because we've tried calling and emailing our elected representatives, right? We've tried calling and emailing the White House. We've tried all of the usual ways. We've tried writing letters to the editor of a local newspaper that nobody even reads anymore because nobody reads the newspaper. What's the point of writing to the New York Times if they probably won't even publish your letter and not enough people read the New York Times? I think we have a much more powerful way of getting this message out to the people by doing what we're doing right now, by using Twitter Spaces, by using social media platforms that we haven't been censored from yet, that we haven't been kicked off of yet. Let's use this microphone while we still have it, while it's available to us, because we all know that our microphones are in danger. Our platforms are being taken away from us every single day. So those of us who are lucky enough to have access to this technology, we should be using it. And when technology fails, still, I believe that the best way to affect change is in person. It's got to be face to face. You've got to go where the politicians are. You've got to attend their town hall meetings. You've got to attend their campaign rallies and get in their faces. And even if that means disrupting a meeting like you guys do, of just interrupting the proceedings and grabbing your bullhorn and speaking your piece, because that way you force them to listen to you. I mean, they may throw you out, and eventually they will. And sadly, a lot of people in the crowd will cheer and applaud when they throw you out of that meeting. They might even arrest you merely for speaking. In most of these cases, I don't think it's resulted in actual arrests. They usually just eject you from the premises. Have you guys actually been arrested doing any of these interventions yet?
We've had some people arrested, but it is very few, maybe just a couple. And they were let go fairly quickly.
Just detained?
Basically, it was kind of like to rough them up and scare them a little bit.
Right.
I mean, Jose could tell you, some stories of him being approached after the fact where people are, threatening him and trying to get his information and everything like that.
Yes.
Wow.
I mean, I've done like 17 of these. I've never once been like taken in the back of a police car, or I've never even been put handcuffs on me. But they do harass you, and they do everything they can to try and get your ID and stuff. And then you just got to say, I'm going to keep walking. Unless you're arresting me, I'm going to keep walking.
That's the correct answer. Our libertarian friend would agree, but I think Angela's having some technical difficulties. She's trying to get back into the space right now as we speak. But that's the best advice that any attorney would give you. If you do decide to participate in an intervention, if you want to interrupt a town hall meeting for Assange, do it. And, don't let them bully you. Don't let them intimidate you. Basically, the correct answer is, am I being detained? Am I under arrest? If the answer is no, keep walking. Don't show them your ID. Don't give them any information about yourself. You have that right. You have that right. And you have the right to record. Don't forget, if they tell you to put your camera away, don't be intimidated. Keep rolling. They're in a public place, and every U.S. citizen is allowed to record in a public place. That's called citizen journalism, and everybody with a phone is a citizen journalist. And then you take that footage and you put it up on Twitter, and we will help you make that shit go viral. We will retweet it. We will get it out there. And, courage is contagious. Like Julian says, if a few people do it, then more and more and more people will find the courage to do it. Jose Vega, Anastasia, Kynan, you guys kind of started this. And I thank you for doing it, because now we see more and more people out there on their own accord starting to do the same thing. They're not even connected with your group. They're not connected with the Schiller Institute. They're just everyday people who had they saw a politician was coming to town or holding a town hall meeting, and they said, you know what, I'm going to go out there and speak my piece about Julian Assange. And God bless you. We need a lot more people doing exactly that. And chances are they're not going to actually arrest you. They will probably just throw you out of the meeting and tell you not to come back and leave in peace. You're not coming there to start a war or start a fight. You just came to speak your piece and leave peacefully. So I'd like to bring Kynan into this discussion. Kynan, you want to unmute your mic and go right ahead?
Yeah. Can you hear me okay?
Can hear you good. How you doing?
Doing well. Well, thanks a lot, Lori, for inviting me on along with my friends Anastasia, Jose, and Diane. And they've already talked a lot about this intervention process, but just to I'll go off a bit of what Jose proposed about getting people to go to these town halls. If just because there's 435 congressional districts in the United States, and if just one person can really take responsibility for their district, and if they can look up the events, they can commit to actually attending them and making it a point to raise the injustice against Assange and to raise the fact that we are headed towards the precipice of no return. We're headed towards a thermonuclear World War III with Russia. It would make a big difference. Anyone can do that. And that's what Jose and I have done, Anastasia has done. But, just a thought I had. I mean, I think it's appropriate that Assange's birthday is just a day before Independence Day. And, it was just...
Oop, I think his mic cut out. Sorry, you're kind of cutting in and out. You still there, Kynan?
Can you hear me? Hello?
I think we might have... Yeah, we lost you there for a second.
I'm sorry.
You might want to back up and say that again?
Yes, someone called me. I forgot to put my phone on Do Not Disturb, which I usually do. Okay. Yeah, no problem. But I was just thinking, since this is just the day before Independence Day and the Declaration of Independence, it's tragic how far we've fallen from those principles that were outlined, and the people who wrote the document, Jefferson and Ben Franklin, made a point to list all the abuses that the British Empire was then carrying out against the colonies. And people should read those abuses and just think to themselves how many of those abuses that the U.S. is carrying out against the other nations of the world, and Julian Assange made it a point to expose those acts, to expose those crimes, and he was unjustly silenced for that. So I think what we have to do in a real sense, along with confronting the fact that Assange has been unjustly prosecuted, we have to carry out a discourse with all the American people, and we have to strike out in a new direction. And I think one thing that we've made a point of pushing out was the JFK American University speech, which evokes how we have to look at the world from the standpoint of our adversary and the Soviet Union. And we have to, and we have to create a real peace in the world. Not the peace, the security of the grave, the security of the slave, but a true peace by which we can all live. And that really gets to the American consciousness, I think, what we were all about. And we have to return to that commitment. So, yeah, I finish off with that. I really thank you for inviting me. And yeah.
My pleasure. Thank you for joining me. And thank you for having me on the podcast that you do with Jose, Declaring Independence, this past week. And we talked a lot about the only presidential candidate that I've heard in this race who is literally quoting that JFK speech from 1963 about having better relations with the Russians. And that's Robert F. Kennedy Jr., of course, President Kennedy's nephew. And I see that we have my friend and sometime co-host of the All the Way with RFK podcast, Matthew Tower, is here, and he's got his hand up. So I want to bring Matthew into the conversation and talk to us a little bit about RFK and his pledge to free Assange.
Thank you so much, Lori, and what a pleasure it was for you to be our star guest on the first 3 episodes of RFK All the Way. And, it was interesting. I remember going back to that very first episode before Mr. Kennedy had even given his launch speech, and I was asking you about your top reasons for supporting Bobby, and I kind of cornered you, and I said, you've got to give me your top 4, and one of them that you said was that you predicted he would free us Julian Assange on day 1. Well, and then he made that pledge. So I think maybe you planted that in his mind, Inception style, or you just know him so well, right? That you two just have great minds.
Yeah, I knew he was going to do it. And I knew he was going to do it on day 1. He wasn't going to waste time or dilly-dally or let that man suffer one more day than he needs to. I knew he was going to do it quickly and do it on day 1.
Yeah. So I wanted to just sort of share an kind of a historical arc with everybody about the JFK RFK connection and the significance to the trajectory of America. If we go back to November 22nd, 1963, right? Charles Eisenstein, who's one of Mr. Kennedy's senior advisors and one of his speechwriters, talked about how we changed timelines on that day, right? We went down this very dark timeline, and we had been going in a potentially beautiful timeline. We were heading in the direction of civil rights and equality and economic development and peace and good relations with the world and kind of a sane approach to politics and policy. And we ended up on this almost like dark nightmare. And that was because on that day, the CIA didn't just assassinate Kennedy. The CIA assassinated the United States of America and took the country over and has run the country continuously for the past 60 years, which is a truth that I think is so horrific and overwhelming that's very difficult for people to grasp. So for Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to become president would represent a couple of things. I mean, one, in a certain way, would be this karmic redemption for him and his family. But much more importantly, it would be about sort of getting back onto the positive timeline. I mean, we've obviously lost so much in those 60 years, but it would be a way to start a new timeline that's aligned with the one that his uncle and his father both wanted. And then tying this in with Julian, I mean, I just want to say, I know there are probably some people in this audience who either support another candidate like Cornel West, which I very much respect, and I appreciate Cornel very much, and I believe he and Bobby are actually aligned on most issues with a couple of notable exceptions, obviously. Either you might support Cornel, or you might be a little bit jaded about politics. So I just kind of wanted to make the pitch that, at least for now, in the Democratic primary, you know, Cornel, we just need to get Bobby past Biden, right? So you can vote for Bobby in the Democratic primary and then just vote for whoever you want to in the general. But I think it's so important that we defeat this dementia-ridden psychotic warmonger Biden, who is taking us towards potential nuclear war, as Diane Sare and so many others have said. And so just keep that in mind. And even if you don't support every single one of his policies, just on this question of Julian, he's the only one we've got, the only hope we've got in terms of governmental executive action to pardon Julian. And, you know, I actually had this huge vision the other day. It just kind of came to me about what's going to happen in a few years if Bobby is elected president. I see on the National Mall in Washington, D.C., that there's going to be this massive museum constructed. The museum is going to be called something like the CIA Empire Museum. And it's going to be everything that's happened in the last 60 years. Everything, I mean, certainly between November 22nd, 1963, and now, all of the assassinations, the coups, the drug selling, the wars, the lies, the manipulations, buying politicians, and, you know, serving corporate interests, and going back even further, because it really started long before November 22nd, 1963. There were decades of buildup in that, which Talbot talks about in The Devil's Chessboard. I interviewed him recently in my podcast. But I think to have a museum that really tells the truth about what we've all been through together as a country, and there is nothing like that. There is no governmental truth about anything. It's all lies. And to have a truth museum, and then I see a plaza, a beautiful plaza, and it is a truth plaza. And there will be statues in that plaza with our greatest truth tellers, including Daniel Ellsberg, Julian Assange, Chelsea Manning, Edward Snowden, and many others. I was literally about to say, and Scott Ritter. I was about to say,
Ritter, yes.
Scott, yes, I was going to, you know, Scott, if the truth that Scott exposed, that even the trumped up BS, lie-based argument for the war in Iraq, it was not even true. There were no weapons of mass destruction. Forget anything else. There weren't, you know, that whole thing, if his truth had been accepted and acted upon, over 1 million people would be alive today who are not. And so the impact of truth-telling is the most valuable thing we have as a society, is truth-telling. And I think we need to honor our truth-tellers. So Scott's hand's up, so we should bring him up, I think. But that's my general idea. Vote for Bobby Kennedy Jr. is my pitch. And feel free to DM me if you want to have an offline conversation about Bobby or why I started a podcast about his campaign, and I hope you get involved.
That's awesome. And, thank you, Matthew. I just want to be fair to the other candidates in the race and supporters of those candidates as well. I see there are some Marianne Williamson supporters in the House, and I've added a couple of them and given them an opportunity to speak, and we'll come to you in a little while. And if there are supporters of former President Trump or Cornel West or Joe Biden who want to speak on behalf of their candidate and what their candidate is pledged to do for Julian Assange, I do want to keep this focused on the Assange case. You're more than welcome to speak. Just raise your hand and we will add you. We want everyone to have a voice in this process. Obviously, this is not an RFK campaign meeting. We're here for Julian Assange. But I think that in my personal opinion, I'm an RFK supporter, and I think that he is our best hope for getting a president in the White House who's committed to transparency and committed to giving Julian Assange, most importantly, his freedom. So my good friend Scott Ritter is here. We're blessed to have him in the house tonight. I see he has his hand up. So I'd like to just bring him in. And hello, Scott.
Well, hello, Lori. Thank you very much for inviting me. Hello, Diane, Jose, Craig, Comrade Mitzi, Anastasia, Kynan, Jason, everybody. Thank you for coming, and thank you for supporting this cause. And I'm just going to say something that's just, I think it is obvious, but I think it needs to be said anyways. It's not a cause. This is a human being. This is a person. This is an individual. This is a father. This is a husband. This is a son who is illegally incarcerated. As an American, I feel powerless because he's illegally incarcerated in England, and therefore he's outside of the jurisdiction of the American court system as we speak. I know people talk about, political intervention, a pardon. With all due respect, innocent people don't need pardoned. And to speak of a pardon implies that Julian has done something wrong, and he has done nothing wrong. He needs to be exonerated. He needs to be released because this is an illegal prosecution, an illegal persecution. This is a violation of everything we stand for as a nation, as a people. It's the First Amendment, but it's more than the First Amendment. This is basic human decency. The torture that this man is going through simply because some powerful officials in the United States have taken umbrage at the fact that he has embarrassed them by exposing the lies, the deceits, the crimes that they have committed. This is an affront to us all. I think, Lori, you mentioned Daniel Ellsberg, and I think it's imperative that we speak of Ellsberg at this time because
Yes.
Ellsberg is the foundation not only of everything that Julian is fighting for, but I'll get to it in a second, the best defense we can have to get Julian released. Daniel Ellsberg is the man who heroically released the Pentagon Papers for the public to see the lies that they were being told by the American government. He was charged with espionage, taken to court. That's a separate issue. We know how that played out. He would have gone to jail, by the way. I just want everybody to understand that. Had his case gone to trial, Daniel Ellsberg would have gone to jail for the rest of his life. Fortunately for him, unfortunately for the rule of law, Richard Nixon had his plumbers team break into Daniel Ellsberg's psychiatrist's office to gain access to records. And when the judge found out about this, the judge dismissed the case out of hand. But I don't want to talk about that. What I want to talk about is the New York Times versus the United States of America. This is something that everybody needs to familiarize themselves with. This was the case where the U.S. government tried to stop the New York Times from publishing the Pentagon Papers. And it went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ruled in favor of free speech. And that's what we need to understand, that the court system at one time understood what was at stake here, understood that This was an existential issue that should the court allow the U.S. government to suppress the publication of the Pentagon Papers, free speech would be dead. The American citizens' ability through a free press to hold in check the abuses of power by the government would be eliminated. We would become literally overnight a dictatorship. And that's the direction we're heading now. My fear is that we, the people, have forgotten about this. We've forgotten about U.S. versus the New York Times. Oh, I know there was a movie made. It was cute, The Post. And when you have, Meryl Streep playing Katharine Graham, and when you have Tom Hanks playing Ben Bradley, it suddenly becomes sexy and it becomes entertaining. But where are those people today? They're actors, of course. They were playing a role, which means that they weren't serving a cause. They didn't believe in anything. They were reading a script. And unfortunately, the American public has gravitated towards the entertainment aspect of this instead of going to the source document itself, which is the opinion of the Supreme Court in U.S. versus New York Times. And this opinion says everything about not only who we are as a people, because it's one of the best opinions, I believe, written in the history of the Supreme Court, especially when we get to the concurring opinion of Justice Hugo Black. And listen to what I'm about to say, because this is so important. He starts off by saying the injunction against the New York Times should have been vacated without oral argument when the cases were first presented. Listen to what I'm saying. I'm saying that there was no merit in the government's case. And the point I'm trying to make is there's no merit in the government's case against Julian Assange either. That this is purely a political prosecution that has nothing to do about the rule of law. And it's a case that should never be heard in the United States. We'll get to that in a second.
Absolutely.
Every moment's continuance of the injunctions amounts to a flagrant, indefensible, and continuing violation of the First Amendment. Understand this, ladies and gentlemen. Every day that Julian Assange sits in a prison is a flagrant, indefensible, and continuing violation of the First Amendment. And the moment he enters U.S. custody, every second he is in remand is a flagrant, indefensible, and continuing violation of the First Amendment. What I'm trying to tell you is we have something called a writ of habeas corpus.
Thank you. I was just going to say, what about habeas corpus?
A writ of habeas corpus cannot be entered into until a person is in the custody of the U.S. But the moment Julian Assange is in the custody, there's, look, I appreciate everything people are doing, and everybody operates in their own way and does what they want to do. But I think rather than, talking about other things, getting a defense fund together to get the best damn constitutional lawyers in America that are ready the moment he lands in the United States to file a writ of habeas corpus in the court of jurisdiction to begin the process of getting Julian Assange released. And why?
Yes.
Because entering the U.S. prison system is a death sentence in its own right. Okay.
And that's exactly what the judge said in Julian's trial. He initially denied the extradition.
He will die.
Yeah.
I'm just telling you that the U.S. justice system is the worst system in the world when it comes to respecting the rights of the people that are introduced to it, especially people of the profile of Julian Assange. So if you think, well, we're going to release him and then we're going to run this thing through the system, he won't survive the system. His case will never go to a jury. There will never be a final decision made because Julian Assange is going to die in American prison before his day before a judge is settled. That's a statement of fact. That's just the way this system works. So habeas corpus. Now let's talk about why I think the court will rule in favor. Again, Hugo Black. The press was to serve the governed, not the governors. That means us, ladies and gentlemen, not the government. The press serves us. Julian Assange is the press. He is he is our servant, not the government. The government has no say whatsoever over what he does. The government's power to censor the press was abolished. Again, abolished by the Constitution, abolished by our founding fathers, so that the press would remain forever free to censure the government. It is the duty of the press to hold the government to account. Julian Assange was doing the duty of the press. He wasn't supposed to be this outlier. He's not supposed to be this exception. He was doing the job. The fact that the rest of the media wasn't doing the job doesn't mean that Julian was wrong. It means they were wrong. He was right. The press was protected so that it could bear the secrets. Listen to what I'm saying. The press was protected so that it could bear the secrets of the government and inform the people. Secrets are not sacred. Secrets are not sacred. For the government to be charging this man with espionage, to be charging this man with violation of classification, the press was protected so it could bear the secrets of government and inform the people. Only a free and unrestrained press can effectively expose deception in government. And Julian Assange was a master of exposing deception in government. This is what he did best. This is why they're going after him so hard. And paramount among the responsibilities of a free press is the duty to prevent any part of the government from deceiving the people and sending them off to distant lands to die of foreign fevers and foreign shot and shell. Julian Assange exposed the war crimes of the United States military in Iraq, in Afghanistan, and elsewhere. He exposed the lies and deceptions that took my nation, your nation, our nation to war, sacrificing not only our citizens, but also the lives of the people that we waged war against, innocent civilians and military personnel alike. We are asked to hold that the executive branch, the Congress, and the judiciary can make laws abridging the freedom of the press in the name of national security.
Right.
Find that the president has inherent power to halt the publication of news would wipe out the First Amendment and destroy the fundamental liberty and security of the very people the government hopes to make secure. Ladies and gentlemen, the United States Constitution protects Julian Assange. It protects us all, but it only protects us if we insist that it be upheld. This is the fight. This is what we have to fight for. This isn't just about Julian Assange. It's about each and every one of us, because if the government is allowed to prosecute, to persecute him, it's fair game, open season on all of us. And understand this, his death in prison will be a government victory, because it is a chilling effect on anybody who stands up. It's the most chilling effect. It has more effect than actually convicting him, because a conviction can be appealed, can be taken through the system, and at some point in time may be overturned. But his death is final. His death is the signal to every American out there. If you go down this route, this too shall be your fate. This is why Julian Assange's case is so imperative. Of course, it's imperative on the human level. I've met his father, I've met his brother, and I've seen the movie Ithaca, and I understand the human cost that's at stake here, the pain and suffering of the family. But it's more than that. This is an existential struggle for the survival of the United States of America as a nation that lives up to the promise, the potential, and indeed the letter of the law that was set forth by our founding fathers so long ago. We are celebrating the 4th of July tomorrow. We are celebrating Julian Assange's birthday today. I don't believe that you can celebrate one without acknowledging the other.
That's
that
right.
If we're going to celebrate the birth of a nation, we must celebrate the birth of a man and the cause of a man who right now, through his prosecution by my government is disgracing everything we thought we stood for when we declared independence so long ago. So that's my appeal. My appeal is we have to bring this down to first principles, basic concepts. This is a constitutional issue. This is not just a human rights issue. It's a constitutional issue. It's about the survival of the nation, the survival of our people, the survival of who we think we are as a nation, who we should be, who we can be. And it's a legal problem, and it needs a legal solution. And the only way we can prevent Julian Assange from dying in an American prison is for an immediate application for a writ of habeas corpus the moment he lands in the country. Now, I'm no lawyer, and I can tell you right now, having dealt with the U.S. legal system all the way through the federal appeal system up to the Supreme Court itself, that if you don't know what you're doing, the system will trip you up. So we need the best lawyers on our side. We have a little bit of time. This is a black and white issue. The Supreme Court already has a precedent in play, the one I just read you. And if we get the right lawyers and they can put together the right case, there might be a chance that Julian Assange could be a free man almost immediately after he arrives in this country, because this case is a disgrace. This case is an embarrassment. This case is a humiliation to the cause of Americans everywhere. And I do believe that if we put this before the proper court of jurisdiction, Julian Assange has a chance to walk away a free man.
Which reminds me to plug the Legal Defense Fund for Julian Assange. And I hope that if you can afford to donate, that you will, so that we can get him the best lawyers that money can buy. Where's Alan Dershowitz? He once supported Julian Assange and once represented WikiLeaks. Where's Jonathan Turley? We need the biggest names in American law to stand by Julian's side, to represent him in the American courts of law. Totally agree that you're right about habeas corpus. It's exceedingly rare that you see someone serve 5 years in prison without having ever gone to trial, without the case having been tried on its merits, without a conviction. And yet there Julian Assange still sits in Belmarsh prison 5 birthdays later, having never been convicted of anything other than jumping bail, which he already served his year-long sentence for that. So they really don't have any reason to keep holding him. And they say, well, he's a flight risk, right? He'll leave the country. But that is not an answer, and that is not a conviction, and that is a violation of habeas corpus. And so I agree. And, you know, Scott knows from experience what he's talking about. As far as I know, of all the speakers that we have here on this panel tonight, Scott Ritter knows better than all of us what it's like to tell the truth about something the United States government is doing, that they're lying to us about, the presence of WMDs in Iraq. Scott knows what it's like to have the FBI and the CIA harassing his family for years, trying to lock them up for almost a quarter century now, more than a quarter century. He himself has been harassed by the intelligence agencies. Like Julian Assange, he too was falsely accused of sexual crimes that he did not commit. His case is still on appeal as we speak. Scott has served time. He knows what American prisons are like. He knows what Julian faces, just as Chelsea Manning did, as so many others have done, have actually served the time, as John Kiriakou did. And if Edward Snowden were in this country, he would also be behind bars, unfortunately. So Scott is speaking from hard experience here. He knows the system. He knows what it's like to have the system persecute him. And I don't think the system is done with Scott Ritter yet, because once again, Scott is telling the truth that contradicts the official narrative about the war in Russia and Ukraine. So, you know, again, when we normalize the prosecution of someone like Julian Assange, then we also normalize the prosecution of someone like Scott Ritter. It's not just journalists who are in danger, it's whistleblowers, it's truth tellers, it's people who leak documents to the press. Or have the courage that Scott Ritter has to get on a Twitter space like this and say the things that he just said, or the things that he says every single day. Our First Amendment is there to protect Scott Ritter's right to speak, and your right to speak, and my right to speak, and even Julian Assange's right to speak, even though he's not an American citizen. And at this point, I want to bring in Scott's friend, my friend, Diane Sare. I see she has her hand up. She's had her hand up for a while. Independent candidate for U.S. Senate from the great state of New York. Hello, Diane.
Hi, Lori. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Great to be here with you and Scott and Pasta and all my friends with LaRouche. I have a few things to say. One, I just want to say something about the LaRouche case because I met him at the time. I mean, Mr. LaRouche, he was on trial in Boston, and all of LaRouche's publications, except the Executive Intelligence Review, were shut down by the government in what was called an involuntary bankruptcy, because they had a previous case where they ruled that organizers had to turn over their notebooks, personal notebooks, which people refused to do, and the government levied a fine of, I don't know what, $1 million a day or something. Then they said that, they said, well, we know your distributors don't have that money, therefore you're involuntarily bankrupt. So in 1986, there were massive raids on LaRouche publication offices all over the United States. There were 400 FBI agents, U.S. Marshals, helicopters, armored vehicles sent to LaRouche's home. We learned later through Freedom of Information the intent was to assassinate him. And they declared his publications involuntarily bankrupt and then used that to go after the fundraisers for those publications for conspiracy to not repay loans. And the judge in the case ruled that the conspiracy to not repay loans ended the day before the involuntary bankruptcy. So the fact that the government seized all of the bank accounts could not be mentioned in defense as to why the loans were not being repaid.
Incredible.
Yeah, now I bring this up because there is nothing short of building a movement that will work. And I want to give you an example that happened. Oh, dear. Am I still there? I just got a call, which I rejected.
Yep, we can still hear you.
Okay, great. Good.
You're good.
So what happened was while LaRouche was in prison and a dozen or so of my associates were being given outrageous jail sentences, 77 years, 86 years, they made up a case that if you take a political loan and you don't have a stockbroker's license, you are guilty of securities fraud. And they told my friend Mike Billington if he would plead guilty, he didn't have to go to jail, but if he refused, 77-year jail sentence, which he got, and he served 11 years in prison. While people were in prison, a federal bankruptcy judge found that the government was guilty of fraud, that the government had committed fraud in the bankruptcy case, because you cannot declare someone bankrupt if you are the only creditor. Now, this is very important, and Scott knows it well in terms of the courts and the justice system. So we had a federal judge ruling the government had committed fraud against the LaRouche movement. And naively, we thought, okay, we've got them. LaRouche will be released. No, they didn't give a damn because they knew there was no crime committed. The whole thing was made up from the beginning to end. So the fact that someone admitted, oh yeah, the government committed fraud, was irrelevant to the case because the issue wasn't truth. The issue wasn't innocence. The issue was to silence a movement, to shut down the publications, intimidate, and terrorize people. We see the same practice with January 6th, the people who've been in prison, many in solitary confinement for 2 years now. Why? To scare people. I'm convinced that the Rage Against the War Machine, I think it was spectacular that there were 3,500 people out there, given that the FBI is still running around based on photographs of people who were at the Capitol, rounding people up. People have been incarcerated for their alleged, trespassing or whatever on January 6th, a year after the fact. So it is designed to terrorize people. Now, here's what I want to say. We have to lovingly tell our friends to stop being cowards because they're afraid of the wrong thing. Because at this point, we are on the brink of nuclear war. And if Scott's still on, maybe he can say more about what's happening at the Zaporozhye plant, which the IAEA says is not under threat. And it's totally possible the Ukrainians are just doing a massive propaganda campaign. But that's not the only thing that's a threat. We have a president with dementia who has no limits. We said we weren't sending tanks. We're sending tanks. We said we wouldn't send F-16s. We're sending F-16s. We said we wouldn't send long-range missiles. We're sending long-range missiles. We have people saying things that are clinically insane and acting as if they're normal, respectable people, like former ambassador to Russia, Michael McFaul, who said that the attempted coup or the insurrection of Prigozhin demonstrated that Putin was weak and that Russia is divided. Now, that's, of course, total bullshit because it demonstrated really the opposite as far as I can tell. But that McFaul says now is a good time to invade Crimea, and don't worry if Russia nukes Ukraine because that will just make the Ukrainians fight harder. Now, first of all, if someone drops a nuclear... and this is the guy who's a former ambassador. You realize that?
Right.
So I know all of us on this call have been called names and conspiracy. I mean, who is crazier here? You kind of have your pinch at yourself. A guy who says it's okay for Russia to nuke Ukraine, it'll make them fight every month. It's like the public service announcement in New York City. Oh, yeah, the nuclear bomb has gone off. Just go in your apartment building and close the windows. Listen to the radio. So we're supposedly crazy. The crazy people are supposedly sane. And the value of someone like an Assange or Daniel Ellsberg or Scott Ritter or Lyndon LaRouche, the people who tell the truth, is that the point of the truth is so that we can avoid going off the cliff to nuclear Armageddon or bioweapons Armageddon or whatever kind of annihilation these lunatics have in store out of their total arrogance and delusion of power, that they're telling the truth prevents that. My last point is that why did Assange do this? And this is where you see that we have failed, because he, like David Hale, the drone warrior whistleblower who's still in prison as far as I know, is because they said when the American people hear about the horrible crimes being committed in our name, that the American people are good enough that they will rise up and they will not tolerate this. Right. And so they came forward and did their job, but the American people have not done our job, that we have not demonstrated the goodness that they believed was in us, for which reason they told the truth. And now, if you're afraid of being called names or, whatever, you're losing your job or this, you're really afraid of the wrong thing, because everything is on the line. We are on, and the reason everything's on the line is because mankind's going through a transition. An old, rotten colonial era is done. It is bankrupt. The leaders of Africa are never going back to groveling. They are exercising their independence. They are working with China and Russia, and the world is fundamentally different, and people are not going to bow before King Charles and the International Monetary Fund. And it's an amazing thing because mankind could actually make a transition right now. So the stakes are very, very high. And we are key players in the United States. So I think the Assange question, that his life is on the line, in a sense, it's a metaphor for all of us. And we have to make it our business, because it could very well be that the fate of mankind is the same as his fate. That's it.
You know, Diane, I often think this past year and a half, so many times since this war in Ukraine began, what would we know about this war if Julian were free, if WikiLeaks was able to operate and do what they do? Just think of what we would know that we don't know right now. And when you look back on the 15 years or so that WikiLeaks was exposing the truth about the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan and Syria and Libya and all of our military actions around the world that the American people were kept in the dark about. I mean, WikiLeaks played a key role in changing public opinion on the Iraq and Afghanistan wars. Those disclosures, seeing the collateral murder video when that was finally shown to the world, it had a huge impact in turning public sentiment against this war, both wars. And we saw the public opinion polls. We saw the impact that WikiLeaks had. And it's truly the reason why the United States government is prosecuting Assange. It's why they went after Chelsea Manning so hard. Chelsea's original sentence was 35 years. Now, President Obama, to his credit, commuted that sentence after 7 years that Chelsea served, but still did not give Chelsea Manning a full pardon. And then we saw the government come after Chelsea Manning a second time, shortly after Julian was arrested. Remember, they put Chelsea back in prison because Chelsea would not comply with the grand jury's subpoena compelling her to testify against Julian. She wouldn't do it. So she served even more time because she would not play along with this charade that the United States government is calling a case against Julian Assange. And that was extremely brave of Chelsea Manning. Once again, Chelsea Manning has proven herself time and time again to be a brave and staunch supporter of Julian Assange, despite whatever differences they have had from time to time. And I know that there are many people here tonight who may be of different political stripes, may belong to different political parties, might have different political beliefs, different political camps, but we are all coming together for Julian, for the First Amendment, for freedom of the press, for the Constitution, for journalists everywhere, for truth tellers and whistleblowers everywhere, and for every single one of us. Every time that you tweet, every time that you publish a blog or make a YouTube video, even you can be in danger too. That's why this case is so important. Regardless of how you feel about Julian Assange, you may have had your differences with him in the past. You might not like him on a personal level, or you might love him. That's not really the point. The point is the First Amendment. The point is freedom of the press, and it's free speech. And that's why we're all here. And I want to thank everybody who is here. And I see that my good friend Jay Scott is here with his hand up. I love Jay. He's also a volunteer on the Robert F. Kennedy campaign, and a good friend of mine, host of the Jay Scott Ascension podcast. And I'd love to bring him into the discussion. Hey, Jay, how are you doing tonight?
Hey, Lori, thanks so much for inviting me and for the warm introduction. And thanks to everyone else here who's taken time out of their schedules to speak about this issue, to learn more about it, and to move forward with the information and the messages that we're talking about here and spreading it to more people. And, really quick, I just want to touch on what Diane said just now, because I think that's really important. She mentioned that the whistleblowers have come forward and done their part. They've come forward, they've given us the information. We know that these terrible things are happening in our names, and they're using our tax dollars to do them. And Julian Assange is one of the people, who's had the courage to shed a lot of light on that. And that also ties directly into what Comrade Misty Putin was saying. She wants to know, how do we turn Julian Assange into a name? And I think what we really have to do is really help people understand why the issue is so important. And I want to actually just share a quick quote from one of my heroes, Bob Marley. And in one of his songs, Redemption Song, he says, "How long shall they kill our prophets while we stand aside and look?" Now, this is a theme that we've seen throughout, a long time. More like this the same thing happened to JFK. It's happened to MLK. It's happened to Fred Hampton. It's happened to so many people. It's still happening today, to Julian Assange. And we really need to put it in perspective so people can understand exactly like what's happening right now. Like all of these heroes that we look up to, we don't realize that during the time when they were doing the things that we now love them for, they were not that popular a lot of the time. Like JFK, while he is one of the most popular presidents in history, when he was actually president, the country was a little bit divided. He didn't necessarily have the entire country on his side. When MLK was, fighting for civil rights, he definitely wasn't that popular. He was thought of actually as a troublemaker, by a lot of people, during that time. And
And
now,
Scott, I'm sorry, Jay, I didn't want to interrupt. I was actually going to agree with you. Just
Mhm.
recently, I was looking at a Time magazine poll from, I think it was March of 1968, just before Dr. King was assassinated. It kind of shocked me to find that 65% of the American people did not support Dr. King at that
Wow.
time. That's
Wow.
shocking, isn't it? I really never knew that. I don't know if you knew that, but I just thought
Yeah.
I'd throw that out there because you're making such an important point that the idols that we look up to today were often not heralded as idols in their time, and we see that happening with Julian Assange. So please continue.
Yeah, exactly. And thank you. And everyone wants to, say now that if they were there during the civil rights movement, that they would have been on Martin Luther King's side. Like everyone thinks that. But then when we see the same persecution happening today, like in real time in front of us, Julian Assange has been locked up for years, for like a decade. And he's not a household name yet, and the only reason he's not a household name is because, unfortunately, I don't think people really understand how many different issues free speech is important to, and why Julian Assange is someone that we need to pay so much attention to. So if you're a conservative who cares about government spending and you want to rein in big spending by the government so we can save our tax dollars, and really that's the issue everyone should care about, but particularly if you're a conservative, war is the most expensive thing that we're spending our money on right now. And what Julian Assange is doing is exposing how we're all being lied to about the reasons behind these wars. And if you go to the other side of the spectrum, a lot of the people on the left and Democrats, they all proclaim to care about, minority rights and what happens to Black people. But if you actually and I know this because I am an immigrant, and when I speak to people in America about what our intelligence agencies have done in foreign policy, most people really don't know. Like most people know that the CIA has done one or two things that aren't bad, but they don't actually know the stories of what's happening. Like everyone loves Jamaica, everyone likes Bob Marley, but they don't realize that reason Jamaica is one of the most dangerous countries in the world is because the CIA completely destabilized it in the 1970s. And without people like Julian Assange shedding light on these issues, no one's going to no one's going to know what's happening behind the scenes. So we really have to show the importance of Julian Assange in all of these different issues that people care about, because free speech is really at the center of a lot of these issues. And without Julian Assange free, we won't have free speech. Like Scott Ritter said, a few moments ago, they're trying to make an example out of him. They want all the other journalists to look at what's happening to Julian and not publish those papers and not tell the truth and not speak up. And unfortunately, it's worked with a lot of the mainstream media. And thank God for independent media. I know I've learned a lot listening to a lot of the major independent channels out there, and all of them are inspired by Julian Assange. So I really think what we have to do is we have to show how Julian Assange and free speech are essential to all of these different issues that people care about. So they're more motivated to be part of that moment. We can't continue to stand by while all these people who fought so hard to tell us what's going on are persecuted, for their courageous efforts. And I really like the idea that Scott put forward about, trying to avoid having him, go to court and to avoid having him go to trial because, because he's absolutely nothing like Epstein, but I only bring up his name because Epstein is one of the most high profile prisoners of all time. And they killed him in jail. And it was a conversation for a few months, then everyone forgot about it. So if we know the establishment is extremely scared of independent media and they're trying to silence independent media, then, we have to realize he is under a lot of threat right now. So we have to come through for him. And even in my own personal life, I do make an effort to speak to pretty much anyone who will give me an ear about it, about Julian Assange. And I really think, especially in American politics, he can be free speech is at the center of all these issues that we care about. So there are very few conversations that free speech doesn't impact. So, I don't want to rant forever, but, that's just, one of the things I wanted to say. Foreign policy and how much money we're wasting abroad, it doesn't just impact, us, but it also impacts all these different people, across the globe. And Julian Assange is at the center of that. So thank you, Lori.
That is so beautiful. Thank you, Jay. I love talking to you and hearing your perspective on things. And, to get back to what the ball that Angela started rolling here at the beginning of this space, Angela McArdle, the chair of the National Libertarian Party, she was talking about we need ideas as to how we reach out to the normies, to the people who aren't as connected to this case as we are, who just glance at the headlines or watch CNN or worse, watch MSNBC or read the New York Times. How do we reach those people who just are still stuck in the mainstream media universe? The people who voted for Joe Biden, the people who voted for Donald Trump in the past or voted for George Bush.
I feel like we have to point out the hypocrisy. Sorry, we just have to point out the hypocrisy because it's so bold. Like Joe Biden claims to care about minorities, but he turns up the heat on all these African countries as soon as he gets into office and reverses some of the few good things Trump did on foreign policy. Republicans claim to care about fiscal spending, yet they're for, almost every war. Like, I don't know. I think that's a good way to reach normies. So I don't know. That's just me.
Well, I think, sane people are persuadable. If we can get our argument in front of them and they hear what's happening to Julian Assange, I believe that your average American will come down on the side of free speech, freedom of the press, of the First Amendment. This is kind of a no-brainer, really. The trick is getting it in front of them. And I have to give a big shout out and a lot of credit to Tucker Carlson for his advocacy for Julian Assange. He was, anyway, while he was at Fox News, by far the top-rated primetime, personality on cable news and had millions of people listening to him every single night. He was the only cable news host or any kind of news host that I know of in the mainstream media who spoke up for Julian Assange, who frequently did segments about the Assange case, kept the American people informed of developments in the case, who had members of Julian's family on his show. And he did us a tremendous service in red-pilling a lot of Americans who were unaware of the Assange case and what the implications of this case are. And another thing that's just happened this week, within the past couple of days, that I think is actually a wonderful development is that Stella Assange, Julian's wife, met with the Pope. She had a private meeting with Pope Francis. And, there are so many Catholics out there, millions and millions of Catholics around the world who will hear about this. Might be the first time they've ever heard about the Assange case. And it's going to appeal to their sense of compassion. I think that's another great way to red pill the normies, as they say. And, Stella said that the Pope's gesture in receiving her was evidence of his, and I'm quoting her words, his ongoing show of support for our family's plight and the Pope's concern over the suffering of her husband, Julian. Now, after she had that private audience with the Pope, Stella Assange said that Pope Francis had sent a letter to her husband back in March of 2021 during a particularly difficult period for him. And Stella said, quote, "He has provided great solace and comfort, and we are extremely appreciative for his reaching out to our family in this way," she told the Associated Press. She said, "He understands that Julian is suffering and is concerned." So now we're hearing the humanitarian argument that's going to reach a lot of hearts out there. Julian has spent 4 years now in Belmarsh Prison in London, still fighting this extradition to the U.S., which is imminent, which could happen at any time. It could literally happen on his birthday. I'm glad they didn't decide to extradite him on his birthday. I was afraid that that might be the kind of thing that we would do just to compound the torture. And once he's here, if he is tried, if he makes it to trial, and I myself have serious doubts that he'll ever see the inside of a courtroom. I'm afraid that he will die or be Epsteined or take his own life before his case ever comes to trial. And I'm sure that they will try to delay the start of his trial until after the next election. I don't think they want the trial of Julian Assange going on at a time when Joe Biden is up in a very tough re-election fight. But if Julian is convicted of all charges, he could face up to 175 years in jail on espionage charges for publishing classified military and diplomatic cables through WikiLeaks. And he's already served more than 4 years in prison, having not been convicted of anything. Prior to that, he claimed asylum for 7 years in the Ecuadorian embassy in London, which was kind of like a jail sentence in itself. He was basically a prisoner at the embassy. He lived in a tiny room, lived out of a suitcase for 7 years and could not walk outside the door because he knew that if he did, he would be quickly apprehended by London police and extradited to the United States. And all of this started, you may recall, many years ago. The reason he went to the embassy in the first place was he was attempting to avoid extradition to Sweden over these sexual assault allegations. But then Sweden dropped its investigation and closed the case in November of 2019. They say because so much time had elapsed, but yet and still, the British judges have kept Julian Assange in prison in Belmarsh pending the outcome of this long-running U.S. extradition case. Now, the Vatican did not release any details of this private audience because obviously it was private, other than to confirm that it happened. The Argentinian Jesuit Pope has long expressed solidarity with prisoners. He frequently visits detainees on his foreign visits and his prison ministry. And he's been doing that since he was an archbishop in Buenos Aires. But Stella said that she and Pope Francis had spoken in Spanish, that she had shown him 2 photos from their wedding. She called the audience with the Pope, quote, overwhelming. And she said that she brought along her mother, brother, and the couple's 2 young sons, Gabriel and Max, who were conceived while Julian was basically imprisoned in the Ecuadorian embassy. So imagine the circumstances that those children were conceived and born into while their father was already a prisoner of a sort. And now the only way they can see their father is to visit him at Belmarsh behind bars. It also breaks my heart, and I wonder what will happen next once Julian is extradited to our country, and I fear that that will happen. I just have this feeling that the British will not stop the extradition. What will happen to Stella and the boys? Are they going to relocate to the United States just so that they can be close to Julian? Will his family relocate here? Will his brother, his father, have to come and live here? And will they be safe in the United States? I honestly have concerns for their safety in the United States, and I hate to say that as an American. Stella told the Associated Press, quote, "I have a lot of faith that the situation will change. And there are a lot of people around the world, from all parts of the world, here and elsewhere, who are trying to get justice and see freedom for my husband." And she did talk about the support that Julian is finally getting from his home country of Australia. Just in the last couple of months, we've seen dozens of politicians start to urge the United States to abandon the extradition case. She said there is growing consensus that, quote, "What is being done to my husband is inhumane, that he is suffering, that he's been in prison for 4 years for publishing true information, revealing the killing of innocents and criminality and injustice." So that's what Stella had to say after her audience with Pope Francis this week. And no matter how you may feel about the Catholic Church, whether you're Catholic or not, that's not the point. The point is that this is a humanitarian mission at this point, and that the Pope has tremendous power to influence public opinion. So as we're trying to reach out to the normies, as they say, I think that's a huge, huge step forward to educating people about the Assange case, people who've, maybe never even heard of Julian Assange. And that's all a very, very, very good thing. And here in a couple of moments, we have my friend Caleb Maupin, who's going to be joining the chat. Caleb only has a few minutes to spend with us because he's doing another show coming up at 10 p.m. Eastern Time. But I did want to get him in for a few minutes. I do want to hear from Caleb because he's a reporter for RT Television, which of course is now banned from cable networks in the United States and Canada, in most of the NATO countries. It's very hard for people to access RT anymore. But I wanted to talk to someone from RT because Julian used to have a television show on the RT network. And he literally did the show from the Ecuadorian embassy. This was back in like 2012, 2013. It was a wonderful show, actually, and I miss it. And you can still find some episodes out there, but of course, RT is banned from YouTube and other social media platforms here in the United States. Those videos of Julian's old RT show are not as easy to find. But, the narrative, and so much of the United States narrative against Julian Assange, at least in the press, although it's not part of the Justice Department's indictment against Julian, is the Russia angle. For years, ever since 2015, 2016, we were told that WikiLeaks was doing the work of Putin, that they were somehow controlled by Russia and the Russian government, and that this was all, the Mueller report, we spent millions of taxpayer dollars investigating that. Roger Stone nearly went to prison over the whole thing. And all of it was tied to WikiLeaks, and yet the government could never really produce a shred of convincing evidence that WikiLeaks and the Russian government had any connection whatsoever, or that Putin was in any way being controlled, that Julian, rather, was being in any way controlled by Putin or the Kremlin or the intelligence services of Russia. That whole case fell apart, which I believe is why, when the Justice Department finally charged Julian, that they left all of that stuff out of the indictment because they know they can't prove that case. Instead, they're going after him for the disclosures of, back in 2010 and the Chelsea Manning documents, basically. So I see that Caleb Maupin has made it, and I just added you as a speaker, Caleb. And I'd like to welcome our friend Caleb Maupin, reporter for RT, founder of the Center for Political Innovation. Caleb, thanks for joining us.
Sure, and thank you for the invitation to join this very important space. There's not much I can say that hasn't already been said, but I guess I've come to realize that when it comes to the case of Julian Assange, it's really a litmus test. If you don't support Julian Assange, you're probably not someone that I can work with or align with politically. And if you do support Julian Assange, you're probably good on a lot of other issues as well. It's pretty clear, when you talk about how Sarah Palin, when she was in office, when she was a prominent figure in the Republican Party, she was not supporting Julian Assange. But now that she's on the outside, she can see the facts and she is supporting him. I also want to add that, it's worth sharing probably my personal experience with Julian Assange, which is a couple years back, I think 2018, 2017. I had a debate with a white supremacist named Augustus Sol Invictus. And, we put a film of it up on YouTube. And, it was just kind of a little debate we did. A couple months later, the guy I debated, he went on to, be a figure in the Charlottesville events, which, was a big shocker to me. And I was arguing against his white supremacist views. But almost immediately after the video of our debate hit the web, Julian Assange tweeted it out. And I was shocked. I mean, my social media was quite small at the time. I had only been a reporter at RT for a couple of years, and I wasn't streaming. My social media was kind of small at that point. But I heard through the grapevine that Julian Assange, that a friend of his had sent him the debate, and he watched it very intently, and he really liked it. And so he made a point of emailing it out to his supporters and sharing it. And that debate that I did with this white supremacist, that was a big deal. And the fact that Julian Assange, made a point of sharing that and showing it to people, that kind of woke me up. So then I talked to some other people who had been involved with solidarity with him. He was at the time in the Ecuadorian embassy. And they told me that Julian Assange, he sees me on RT and he knows my work pretty well and he knows who I am. And, that as soon as he'd seen that, he thought it was a really great conversation and he wanted to kind of stimulate debates like that. And I was shocked. And so it occurred to me that I needed to go visit Julian Assange. And, I was talking to different people about, getting things in order to go to London to go maybe just meet Julian Assange face to face inside the embassy. But then we all know what happened. And this kind of thing, the reason this is important is because Julian Assange is a real person. He's a name that you hear on television, but he's actually a real, thoughtful person who takes what he does very, very seriously. And he's engaging with all kinds of different political ideas, and he's not afraid to stray from the orthodoxy of the left or the right or whatever. He takes what he does very seriously. He knows he's against powerful forces, and he realizes that the dividing lines in the world today are really between, are you for these very powerful forces or are you against them? And the powerful forces have lined up against him because he dared expose their crimes. When I look at what's being done to Julian Assange, I can't help but think that the reality is they want us to see what's happening to him and they want to threaten all of us. This is a threat on all of us at this point. This is a threat on all of us who challenge their lies, who question what they're doing, who expose, who work in independent media. And that's why it can't stand. That's why we all have to line up and oppose it. Now, much earlier in the conversation, Tara Reid talked about how there's operations to get all of us fighting with each other and to get all of us suspicious of one another. And I couldn't agree with her more because, we're all doing this kind of work. If we're standing in solidarity with Assange, if we're questioning their wars and their lies and their emerging police state, we're doing it because we're people who care and we take this seriously and we want to be on the right side. Our enemies, they know very well how to turn our strengths against us and to try to appeal to our egos, appeal to our desire to look good and be in good standing, to manipulate us against each other, to make us suspicious of each other. And that is really the most urgent thing now, is that we have to focus on building an in real life movement to free Julian Assange, to oppose the police state, to oppose their wars. And that Twitter, as much as I appreciate being here, Lori, Twitter's not real. All these accounts and the bots and the shares and the same for Facebook, the same for YouTube. None of this is real. Social media is a gigantic social, psychological operation to manipulate people's minds. And if we get too caught up in the social media stuff, we're not going to have the networks in place that are needed when things become more serious, which is what the stock market indicates, which is what all the signs indicate. If you look at what's happening in France right now, things are going to get more serious. So those of us who understand who Julian Assange is up against, those of us who understand that we need to build an in real life movement of solidarity, those of us who understand it really doesn't matter what label you throw on yourself ideologically. It matters what kind of work you actually do and what kind of network you're actually building. We got to stick together. And so I want to thank you for having me on, Lori. I do appreciate it. And bringing all these people together. You've done a great thing today. Happy birthday, Julian Assange. Thank you.
Thank you, Caleb. And, I'm so glad that you came because, RT, of all of the various networks, during Assange's entire time at the Ecuadorian embassy, they even gave him his own TV show during his case. They're the only network that provided the kind of coverage that this story deserves. They would lead their newscasts with it whenever there was a development in the case. No American news network did that at all. So, and then they got sucked into this orbit as well of being threatened and being prosecuted by the United States government. I don't think the government's actually filed any cases against RT, but there's always been that threat. There's always been that threat against your network that we could come after you at any time. And RT is still in danger. So, and you're in danger as an American journalist working for RT, all American journalists who might work for, a news network that, is being operated out of a country that we designate an enemy. That puts all journalists in danger and American journalists in danger. So you yourself may be looking at the same kind of persecution one day that Assange is currently facing. And I know you see that on the blackboard right in front of you.
Well, sure. And if you look at what they're doing to the Uhuru movement right now, I mean, that case, it needs to be raised from the heavens because it's a test. They want to see if they can actually lock up these, black revolutionary activists on charges of being supposedly Russian agents, alleging they got some money or they went to some conferences or did some Zoom calls. And, we all have to just come together and lock arms. And if Tucker Carlson, who's an arch conservative, can stick up for a group of black socialists, so I think all of us can. So I want to thank you. I'm gonna go on, and I have a stream scheduled myself now, so I have to go back and take care of that. But I do appreciate the invitation, and I'm honored to be here with so many important anti-imperialist voices and people that oppose the emerging police state. So thank you for including me in this, Lori, and shout out to you for all the important work you do with Maverick News and elsewhere. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Caleb. We are all Assange. Have a great night.
You too.
Thanks. And, I wanted to bring in Jason Bennett. Jason, if you'd like to speak, because I understand that you're a Marianne Williamson supporter. And I wanted to hear from, some supporters of other candidates. We've got a lot of RFK supporters here, but I'd like to hear what Marianne Williamson is pledging to do to help Julian Assange. Can you help me with that?
Well, I am quite sure. Thank you so much for asking. And I'm quite sure she'll pardon him on day one, just like RFK.
Has she said so? Has she
I
put
think
out
she
any...
had. I'm 99% sure. I don't know if she said day one, but I'm 99% sure. I can't remember whether she's explicitly said that, but she's definitely
I know she
talked about it.
Julian. I just don't know if she's made a pledge to actually pardon him. I was curious about that.
I can't. I don't speak for her. I don't work for the campaign, and I want to say also that I think that she has an amazing platform, and I have tremendous respect for her intellect and her patriotism, and actually her sacrifice for running, because it's not fun at all. But also, I am a huge fan of RFK, and I'm super excited about him and his candidacy, and Cornel West as well. And thank you so much for doing this space. It's a wonderful space that you've hosted tonight, and I've really, really been so deeply moved by actually so much of what's been said. Obviously, this is an issue that just should obviously transcend politics and party and ideology. This is basic. It's not just freedom of speech. It's not just freedom of the press. It is, as Scott talked about, due process, equal protection under the law. I mean, this is extra legal. It's illegal. It's a crime against humanity what's being done to Julian Assange. And I'm pretty optimistic about not about him being pardoned. By the way, just a reminder that Joe Biden is Catholic, so maybe that's part of why
That's right.
maybe that's part of why the Pope had that meeting. I think that's great. And Biden, when he's the few hours of the day that he is apparently awake, is probably contemplates once in a while meeting his maker. So maybe who knows, it could turn out to be a powerful thing. But it is a disgrace. This is a slow motion torture and murder that we're watching.
Yes.
And Scott Ritter is absolutely right, as usual, that our criminal justice system here is an abomination. It's an unconstitutional abomination. And Julian hasn't even had the privilege of getting his day in court. I say privilege, sort of cynically. So I pray for him and thank you to everybody in the space. So many amazing people in here. You got a good group tonight, and thank you for letting me speak.
Such a great group. And thank you, Jason.
Absolutely.
Thanks for joining us, for lending your voice to Julian on his birthday.
Yes, happy birthday. God bless his family, his children.
So
my God. Thank you. Good night.
Man, I got goosebumps right now. This has been such an amazing space. And, it's interesting. I invited some Trump supporters, some friends of mine that support Donald Trump, and I invited them to speak, and they declined. And it's interesting to me that, Donald Trump, who once said, I love WikiLeaks. In fact, I think he said that hundreds of times. I love WikiLeaks. It was Donald Trump who had Julian Assange arrested in the first place. And Julian sits in prison today because of Donald Trump's Justice Department. And of course, Joe Biden has continued this prosecution in his presidency now. Joe Biden has called Julian Assange an information terrorist. So I don't think we can count on President Biden, despite his good Catholic heart, to step up and save Julian's life. I think he's going to continue this prosecution. He's going to continue this slow assassination that we're all witnessing in front of our eyes. And I was hoping that some Trump supporters might want to come on the space and speak for their candidate, and maybe explain to us why Donald Trump did not pardon Julian Assange when he had many opportunities to do so, including as he was leaving office. And many appeals were made through Julian's family, through Julian's lawyers, to President Trump before he left office to please, please, please pardon Julian Assange. Now, Candace Owens asked President Trump, former President Trump, about it after he left office in an interview. And that's when Trump said, well, I wanted to pardon Julian. I really did, he said, believe me. But I was under all this pressure, and they were impeaching me, and Mitch McConnell was going to impeach me if I did that. And that was his reasoning or his excuse as to why he didn't end up actually pardoning Julian Assange. So, I don't think anyone has asked President Trump about it yet on the campaign trail in this election cycle. He has said that given another chance as president, this time he would release the JFK files, which he failed to do on his watch last time. But I have not yet heard President Trump say anything as to whether he would actually pardon Julian Assange if he was reelected again, and if he's changed his mind on that case. I would like to remind everyone that back in 2011, Trump, who was then just a civilian, hadn't run for president yet, was on Fox and Friends, and he was asked about the WikiLeaks case by Brian Kilmeade. And President Trump, or rather back then he was just Donald Trump, he called it disgraceful what Julian Assange did by publishing those documents. And he said that there ought to be the death penalty for Julian Assange. He actually said that. The video's out there. You can find it if you just search around. I think it's out there on YouTube. And it's here on Twitter. If you just search Twitter for, Donald Trump, Julian Assange death penalty, it'll pop right up. So I don't have a lot of hope, to be honest with you, that Donald Trump will be the president who will finally pardon Julian Assange. So I see that we have James Bond, 007, is in the house and would like to speak. So I'm going to go ahead and add you as a speaker, Mr. Bond, 007, and very curious to hear what you have to say. Welcome to the space. Are you connected, James Bond? Maybe his super spy phone isn't working. Are you there, James Bond? It just says connecting. But I don't think he's connecting. We seem to have an issue connecting James Bond. So while he's getting connected, would anyone else like to speak? Anyone who'd like to speak, feel free to raise your hand. If there's any Trump supporters in the house tonight who'd like to step up for their candidate, you're more than welcome. And I'm just going to open the floor to anybody out there who would like to speak. I see we also have James Ballantyne, who has his hand up. Is James Ballantyne with us?
Good evening, all.
Hi there, James. Welcome.
Thank you so much for letting me in.
Yes, we can hear you.
I have been hearing you all since not so long, but the moment since I have joined.
Oh, this is James Bond. I'm sorry. Hello, 007. We have two Jameses. We have James Ballantyne and we have James Bond. I was looking at the wrong James. Sorry about that.
Okay, no problem. So this James Bond right now communicating to you all is now in India. And whatsoever is going on and the things which are favorable or not are not always in someone's power. Everything, whatever happens with the flow of time, and change is the only thing which is constant in this universe. I hope you all are agree. Laurie, especially you. So it's in
I'm having, sorry, James, I'm having some difficulty hearing you. It sounds like your connection is bad.
Okay,
Your phone is kind of cutting in and out.
Is it proper now? Is it okay?
Yeah, let's give it a try.
Okay.
Yeah, let's see if we can keep it connected.
Okay.
Keep going.
I don't know. I'm just checking all the satellite is working properly.
I thought you had the super secret James Bond spy phone.
Okay. So my my well wishes are with Mr. Assange and all the Assange. Like you stated that we all are Assange. And along with it all, I urge you, request you, welcome you to India. So whosoever is ever willing, wishing to be in India, welcome, most welcome. Come and just DM me. All the things will be arranged. And the fight for Mr. Assange will be on forever, ever and ever. That is all from my side. And here in India,
That's
it's
beautiful.
morning, and it is 7:45 now in the morning. And there you guys are being late to sleep just to take care of your circadian rhythm and biological clock. So if there is any question or anything in specific of India, please do ask. Let
I
things
love it.
happen.
I was going to ask you, James, tell me about, is there, how is the support level for Julian Assange in India? Are they aware of the case? Is there an activist movement agitating for Assange's freedom. Can you tell me about that?
Yep. Yes. So here in India, people are always in favor of letting things clear. So people in India are always concerned about the transparency. Whosoever has invaded India, they always welcomed each and every person, every tribe, every religion, and they themselves remain transparent, and they expected the same from the each person, religion, caste, creed, color, whatever. So the people in India are concerned about all the things in regard of Mr. Assange. People are working on their level, and whatsoever is the support available or people in India can make, they are making it. So you need not to worry about it.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And thank you for joining the Twitter space and sharing with us the perspective from India. I love it.
Okay.
Thank you so
So
much.
have you ever been here in India, Laurie?
No, I have not. I've
Please,
always wanted to travel there, though.
please. Here in India, this is a holy month named Shravan. To the deity, Lord Shiva. So this is a holy month in India, and everything in regard of the troubles to any person, any creature in this universe is taken care of by Lord Shiva. I guess you have heard about. So he is the guru, the teacher, and he has all the things to let a human or creature overcome by letting him or her teaching the dance, the meditation, the yoga, everything, music, whatever it is, arms, ammunition, everything, atoms, everything. So please be in India, and all the
That's lovely.
things
And I
will
hope
remain as clear as the sky.
Thank you so much, James. I am about to bring this Twitter space to a close, but we've got one final speaker that I wanted to bring up on the stage real quick before we call it a night, because this gentleman is in Julian's home country of Australia. And I wanted to welcome James Ballantyne to the space. James, are you there? Can you unmute your mic?
Hi, yes, thank you for having me up here. Just wanted to express my embarrassment and shame of my government not speaking up or doing anything right from the get-go. I know a lot of Australians are not happy about the silence from our government. I think there's a sense of powerlessness amongst Australians for Assange. Australia has always been a kind of lacking sovereignty and a middle power. So the struggle sort of goes on, but I just wanted to express that on behalf of Australian, as an Australian rather. I've only been to one protest in my life, and that was for Julian. It was many years ago. And so, yeah, that's all I really wanted to say, I think.
Well, God bless you, sir. Thank you. I am so glad that you found this space. And believe me, I know that many Australians share your feeling, and they're every bit as frustrated and with their government. But finally, it seems your government, or at least some MPs and your prime minister, are starting to put a little pressure on the United States government to drop these charges. That's kind of that's a hopeful sign, don't you think?
No, I find it a suspicious sign. If you can hear me, I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes, yeah, go ahead.
Mic is on, I think. Yeah, no, I find it suspicious. I think it's about face, quelling certain margin who do worry about Assange. I think Australia will always be in lockstep with the administration in the US, and I think that they will simply go along with the powers that be for Assange, or however they wish to, or what they wish to do with him, is my feeling. And as for the UK, I can't speak too much, but I do believe that our government is rather spineless, and they're part of the Five Eyes, so they'll do as they're told. They'll do as they're told, and that's what they've always done. And I believe that's what they'll do.
Sadly, I'm afraid you're right. History shows us this. It would be a huge break with tradition for Australia to oppose the United States on this extradition. So do you think that your prime minister and these MPs that are finally speaking up for Assange, do you think they're just virtue signaling because it costs them nothing politically to do this?
Yes, that's well said. I think that's exactly what it is. I think our politicians are actors. They're puppets, and their strings remain hidden. But we know where the strings lie, roughly. And so, yes, free political manoeuvring, as you said. Time will tell, but I hope that it sort of works out well for Assange and his family, and all of us too, because it's obviously his fight is our fight. So.
That's right. That's right. And I was curious about your accent. What part of Australia are you in? You sound like a Melbourneite. Are you from Melbourne?
I'm from Brisbane, Queensland.
Okay.
Yeah, you're right. The accents do differ a little bit, I think, from state to state or south to north. I think it's quite subtle, but many Australians are aware of Assange's plight. I think Australians are too laid back in a way, a bit too compliant, a bit too she'll be right, no worries. And right. I actually think that Australians don't know how to stand up for ourselves or protest it. It's very uncomfortable. It's very taboo to even think of hitting the streets or even reaching out to an MP. I think that people's wealth statistically per capita is quite high. On paper, our real estate is worth quite a lot. And I think these sorts of comforts we have here quell the unrest and the injustice. But I do have to go. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, James. You have a great day, and thanks for joining the space. And while we're looking overseas, I see my friend Welsh Republic podcast has his hand up. I was just on his show last night or this morning, his time. Hey, Welsh, I'm going to unmute your mic and join the conversation. How are you doing tonight?
Hey, Guy. I'm not too bad. Can you hear me fine?
Yes, I guess I should say, how are you doing this morning? What time is it where you are?
Oh, it's about 2:24 p.m. here in New Zealand at the moment. And I really think all of you guys are doing a very good job, fighting for Assange. I think it's absolutely disgraceful what's happening to him. I think he's one of the bravest people, who ever live in history. And I think, what he's exposed, the crimes of Obama, Clinton, and what the United States government has done. Sorry if I get a bit overwhelmed when I'm speaking because I got autism, so it's hard for me in group conversations of sensory overload. But yeah, I think what you, Laurie, Scott Ritter on here, what he was saying, and all of you guys who are fighting for Assange, I think you guys are doing a great cause because it's not just him, that's going to get affected. It could be all of us, because this is something that could affect all of us if we're not careful, So yeah, happy birthday to Assange, and I think he's a great guy, and I think we should never give up and keep going.
God bless you, man. I always love being on your podcast. I know how dedicated you are to Julian Assange's freedom. And there you are down there in New Zealand. So make some noise down there, down under. We need all the help we can get. Thank you for lending your voice to this. I want to thank all of our speakers who were here tonight. What an amazing panel of people who are truly, truly dedicated to the cause of Assange's freedom. I want to thank everybody who has been listening Thank you for supporting us. And I think I did record this Twitter space. Yes, I did. So if you missed part of it and you want to go back later and catch up on the parts that you missed, you can do the instant replay. And I will also be uploading this to other platforms for people who might not use Twitter, might not know how to do Twitter spaces. I know there are a lot of folks out there who are new to Twitter spaces and they're not really sure how the heck to use it. So I'll be putting this up on YouTube and Rumble and Twitch and every other platform that I can possibly get this out on. And that'll probably be uploaded sometime overnight or early morning tomorrow, U.S. time on the 4th of July, as we celebrate our independence, our liberty, and our Constitution, while at the same time remembering a man who has none of those things, Julian Assange, who does not have his independence or his freedom or his liberty. And that's who I'll be thinking of this 4th of July. And I think of him every holiday. I think of him every birthday. I think of him every Christmas. It breaks my heart what's happening to Julian. And like I say, he's my Gen X brother. We're the same age. I've been doing journalism for 35 years. And when WikiLeaks came along, I saw it as the perfect marriage of old school journalism and new school journalism, harnessing the power of the internet and the anonymity and the encryption of the internet that allows whistleblowers to anonymously submit documents. And that was something that before WikiLeaks came along, there really wasn't a way to do that anonymously other than the old-fashioned way. And I'm an old school journalist. I remember the days when if a source wanted to leak you documents anonymously, they literally had to slip them under your door. They had to find out where you lived, and they would come to your house and like slip an envelope under your door. It was the only way that they could remain anonymous. And WikiLeaks revolutionized the method that whistleblowers can use to securely drop documents to a journalist without being identified, without putting their lives at risk or their jobs at risk or their families at risk. And that's another thing that we have to thank WikiLeaks for, is their innovation in technology that made this new journalism and independent journalism possible. And when our government says, and when our media says that Julian Assange isn't a real journalist, I beg to differ. I just say he showed us all how it's done in the 21st century. And he innovated a new method that now all of the mainstream media uses that same encryption software. When you want to drop documents to the Washington Post or the New York Times, you're using Secure Drop, which was invented by WikiLeaks. So again, thank you, WikiLeaks, for all of the information that you've given us, for all of the wisdom that you've given us, for all the documentation that you've given us. Oftentimes, all WikiLeaks did was prove with the documents what we all kind of suspected was true, what our gut instinct was telling us was probably happening, but we just couldn't prove it until WikiLeaks gave us the documents showing us, yep, that's exactly what's going on, folks. Your government's lying to you about these wars. And, you know, we all owe Julian a huge debt of gratitude. Everyone in this business who does journalism and who's committed to actually telling the truth, not just stenographers for power, not just people who amplify the government's press releases, but those who are actually trying to get to the truth, to the bottom of the story, to find out what's really going on. The only way we can do that is through whistleblowers, people on the inside, people like the late Daniel Ellsberg, who had the courage to come forward with those documents that they knew could land them in prison for the rest of their lives. I don't think the whistleblowers should be prosecuted in cases like that. Certainly as long as no U.S. personnel are hurt or killed as a result of those disclosures, I really can't see why the government would pursue such a case. And that is exactly what Trump's former lawyer, I guess he's still his lawyer, Rudolph Giuliani, said when he did an interview with Fox News. I think it was in 2018 or no, it was around the time of Julian's arrest. It was in early 2019. And of course, he was asked what President Trump was going to do. And Rudy Giuliani couldn't predict what the president was going to do. But he said that his personal opinion as a former U.S. prosecutor, that the government had no case. And he held up the Pentagon Papers precedent as a reason why the government's case against Julian Assange would ultimately fail. And although I don't agree with Rudy much on politics, I do respect him as a prosecutor and an attorney. He's one of the best. And I think he was absolutely right in his assessment that Julian Assange did nothing wrong, that Julian Assange did the same thing that the New York Times and the Washington Post did once upon a time in the Pentagon Papers matter. And from a strictly legal standpoint, Rudolph Giuliani is correct. And I am disappointed that President Trump didn't listen to his good, solid legal advice on the Assange case. And instead, Trump made the wrong decision, which was to continue the prosecution, to not have his Justice Department drop these charges, and failing to pardon Julian Assange. So let's hope that we can get a good man or good woman elected next time around, because the fastest way, the best way to end this charade right now, or at least in January of 2025, is through a presidential pardon. It cuts through all the red tape. We'll probably never get Congress to pass any laws. So really, it's up to the president. The president has that power. Under the Constitution, that pardoning power is, fully within the president's control. So it really does matter more than ever who we elect as our next president. And if we re-elect Joe Biden, we know what Julian's going to get. If we re-elect Donald Trump, I don't have much hope that Donald Trump will do the right thing and pardon Julian Assange. So I think that kind of leaves us with RFK Jr., maybe Marianne Williamson would pardon him, and perhaps Dr. Cornel West. I apologize to any Cornel West fans that are here. I'm not sure what Cornel West's position is on Assange. I know that he generally supports Julian Assange, but I have not heard him say yet, and I don't know if he's been asked, whether or not he would pardon Julian Assange. I hope that someone will ask him about that. So once again, I want to thank everyone who tuned in tonight to listen to this Twitter space. I hope that you'll retweet it. I hope you'll get it out to your friends and anybody that you know who cares about Julian Assange, or anybody that you think should care about Julian Assange. Free press is what we need. And to have a truly free press, we can't have that until we have a free Assange. We are all Julian Assange, every last one of us. So thank you again for attending, and happy Independence Day to our friends in the United States. Happy Canada Day, a belated happy Canada Day to our friends in Canada. And I hope you all have a wonderful day or a wonderful night wherever you are. Thank you so much. Good night.